I think we will make a start. My name is Masena Konafiranisi, and I am the General Manager for Infrastructure and Assets. Tonight, myself and David Paris, our Chief Financial Officer, will step you through a bit of a pack that we've prepared just to share as much information as we can in regard to local water done well. Just before we kick off, a little bit of housekeeping. So if we hear the alarms go off or anyone raises an alarm, our evacuation point is in the car park. So we go down the stairs, out the front door and to the right. The bathrooms are just in the hallway out here, turn right, very close to the left. I think that's about it. Right, so I will just start you off with what we're going to cover tonight, what the consultation is about, our current situation today in regards to water supply, the regulatory environment, the overview of the two options that you would have seen in the consultation pack, the advantages and disadvantages of both of those, how the dollars stack up, and then what the next steps in the process are. So this is all because we want you to help decide how we proceed with our water services in Masterton in the future. Some of you may remember back in 2016 there was an incident, a very serious incident in Havelock North. There were 5,500 people who got quite sick. A number of people actually ended up in hospital, and there were a few deaths which were attributed to the quality of water at the time. There was a waterborne outbreak. That incident was really the catalyst for central government to step in and review how the three waters were being managed across New Zealand. And the focus was around quality of supply, security of supply, and also investment in what was going to be happening in the future, all around future generations and the life cycle of our assets. So the first piece for that was the Three Waters reform. That was when, at the time, the Labour government set up a unit within DIA, and the role of that unit was to take 67 councils that were providing three water services and setting up, initially it was 4, then it went to 10 separate entities who would only be providing that as a service. Then with the coalition, the intent remained the same, just the method was slightly different. So there was a response to local governments saying, we want to have a say in how this all moves forward. So the initial legislation was repealed, and we ended up with local water done well. It's a duplicate. Sorry, going backwards or forwards. So water reforms and local water done well. Councils can continue to operate their three water services, provide their three water services in the same way that we currently do, or we can choose to be part of what's called a council-controlled organisation. So we can choose to be a shareholder of another company that has been set up specifically for delivery of three water services. There is flexibility around how that entity might deliver the services in terms of whether they resource internally and they do all the work themselves, or they contract some of the work out or all of the work out. So flexibility and decisions around all of that sort of stuff comes a little bit later down the track. The regulatory environment is also changing. So historically, in the water supply, we had Taumata Arawai, which was the regulator that was primarily focused on just drinking water, the quality of the supply, and compliance. They are now the Water Services Authority, and their remit has expanded somewhat to include the monitoring of wastewater and also stormwater impacts. So we have the quality component being looked after by Taumata Arawai. We have the Commerce Commission. This is a new regulatory arm as a result of the legislation. And their role is to make sure that the services provided are efficient and fair pricing is allowed for. So their role is around protection for the consumer. And then we have the Regional Council, and their remit remains the same as what it always has, and that's been around compliance with resource consents, land use, and our environmental standards that we're required to comply with. Masterton's Local Water Done Well, and our pack that we have produced for the community. So our assets are, we have one water intake, we've got 2 treatment plants, 1 pump station, and 218 kilometres of water supply pipe. The average age of our pipelines is around 33 years, which sounds old, but typically a pipe would be around, maybe have a life of 50 to 100 years, depending on the material. Our wastewater network, we have 4 treatment plants, 13 pump stations, 214 kilometres of pipelines, and average age of our wastewater network is 42 years. In terms of our stormwater, we have 55 kilometres of stormwater pipelines. We have open channels, and we have drainage and streams in place. We don't necessarily have what you would call a full stormwater network, but we have some infrastructure in place. So what we've done to date, we have engaged with partners, including Mana Whenua, and we've landed on 2 options, which is the one that you see in your consultation pack. Our proposal is to join Masterton, South Wairarapa and Tararua to form a Wairarapa-Tararua council-controlled organisation. That's one option. Our alternative option is to carry on doing Three Waters exactly as we do at the moment, but we need to include some enhancements which will allow us to ensure that we can comply with some of the new legislation around the Commerce Commission, Tamara Arawai, and so on. So the proposal is be part of an entity specific for Three Waters. The alternative is business as usual with some things to add on. The proposal, so in regards to a joint CCO, so dedicated organisation set up just for Three Waters, ownership, so the ownership structure is through shareholding. The governance is different to how we are currently governed with our elected members through that democratic process. With a CCO, it is a limited liability company, so a board of directors is required. And they are independent directors. They cannot be staff, and they cannot be elected members. Strategy. So the legislation requires a water services strategy to be developed by the shareholders in combination with iwi, but also with the entity. Accountability. So because we wouldn't have elected members, the accountability would sit with directors and potentially a shareholding committee. The control of this kind of organisation sits again with the board of directors, but there is influence that council can certainly have through a few instruments. One is a shareholders agreement. The other is a statement of expectations, and the last is the water services strategy. So the shareholders agreement is around like allocation of shares, who has what right, voting rights. The statement of expectations is around what, as shareholding organisations, we would expect from this particular entity. and the water services strategy is something that they are required to develop, but in collaboration with their shareholders. So that might be where we specify some particular projects that we want to have done over certain periods of time, so forth. I'll just go back to that one. If you look on the right, so these are the statistics and the number of connections of the 4 potential shareholding councils. Pretty clear Masterton is the biggest. Our alternative option, so this is where we carry on business as usual, but we have to do some extra things, which would include requiring additional resources to be able to do those things so we could comply with legislation. So ownership remains entirely with council. We hold our assets. We also hold our debt. Governance, there wouldn't be any change, so it's the way that we currently govern. We have our chief executive and we have our elected members and our mayor. Strategy, we would also be required to do a water services strategy, so that is a requirement regardless of what kind of organisation you decide to enter. And not having done one yet, but reading the legislation, it would be very similar, I imagine, to like your annual plan and some of the long-term things that you as a shareholder might want to see delivered on. Accountability, so again, the buck stops with everything. If we continue on the way we are with council officers, our elected members and our CE. So we would do our own internal planning, annual report and so forth as we currently do. We monitor our own work as we currently do. Borrowing. So there is a key difference between both options. At the moment, our borrowing capacity is 175% of revenue, and David will go into a bit more detail on that. So that would remain the same. If we said, right, we just want to carry on business as usual, that would remain the same. That's the cap. I'll just go back one because I may have missed, yeah I did, sorry, I missed borrowing on this one. But with if we decided, yes, we want to join up this separate entity, it increases council's ability to borrow funding to 500% of revenue. So that they are key differences. Advantages. And some of this is your perspective, depends on how you look at things, but I'll rattle through them and we take any questions at the end. Bigger scale. So there is a general sense, and there has been a lot of research and evidence around scale of organisations, and that you can get efficiencies with scale. The bigger you are, we believe that you can get those efficiencies over time. Access to increased levels of funding, so I mentioned the 500% versus the 175%. That's an advantage for the Wairarapa Tararua option. Streamlining of work program. So each of the 4 councils will have their own annual plan. We've got our own LTPs. So you have numerous projects, but when you are one, you have the opportunity to look across those and think about how you can rationalise the work so you can effectively produce the same amount of work for less or more. And you do that by considering smart ways of like contracting out your work, packaging work. And the Wairarapa Tararua option is the preferred option as expressed by iwi. With Masterton, the advantages of no change other than adding in additional resources to ensure compliance. There will be minimal disruption. So setting up an entity that is focused solely on 3 waters, that is going to be a big task. Certainly achievable, but if it is Masterton on its own, very little disruption. It does mean that council gets to retain ownership of your assets. You hold the debt, but you have ownership and control over the assets. And that also means, we dictate, our elected members dictate the terms around levels of service and performance requirements and that kind of stuff. So if it's internal, that's all driven down to officers from our council chambers. Disadvantages. With the Wairarapa Tararua, so while being Masterton is, relatively smooth, easy transition under the legislation, there will be complexity with a dedicated Three Waters entity. That will definitely be a disadvantage when you're sizing them both up. Loss of internal council expertise and understanding. So a number of council and staff roles would move into this new entity. No direct control over assets, as I mentioned. There's some risk associated with council-controlled organisations around the debt levels. So yes, it's great. You can borrow more, but legislation does require that to be guaranteed by the shareholding councils. And there would be some existing overheads that council will continue to carry or need to find ways to reduce. Disadvantages for Masterton on its own: no professional board, resourcing and extra staff costs. So the legislation is very clear. When we look at it, we can say, right, we need more staff, certain number of people in certain areas. We would go ahead and do that, but the cost of all that is just on Masterton ratepayers, obviously, because we don't have anyone else to share that with. Potential competition for staff. So there is a risk that we could lose staff. All councils across New Zealand are going through this exercise. There will end up being, I imagine, a lot of opportunity and potentially some really big organisations that may well attract our people. Smaller scale, so you have reduced buying power. You can't get quite as competitive rates as being larger. There's a shared focus, so if our service provider was only focused on water, it means that our internal infrastructure people have less that they've got to focus on. At the moment, there are a number of sets of infrastructure and kind of activities that we have to manage internally, so you can get a little bit distracted. You don't have the same focus. Masterton only is not the preferred option as expressed by iwi, and it doesn't actually align with the intent of the new legislation, which is all about trying to bring organisations, bring councils together to reduce the number of organisations that are providing Three Water services. A component of that is around intergenerational change, so ensuring that our children's children are not left with, huge significant bills to pay because we have not been able to potentially access the right funding or spend the right amount of money in the time that when we have a say. Uncertainties. So there are certainly a number of uncertainties. We've done our absolute best with all the data that we have had and the currency of that data, and working with other councils to understand, what might be the best way to kind of get to this point. Some of the uncertainties are around the board and the shareholding. So legislation is really clear that the board must be a professional board, they must be independent. But at the end of the day, the shareholding organisation will decide how they go about electing their board members, who they might be, whether iwi are on the board, whether iwi are not. We have some pretty clear direction in that space. But there's uncertainty also around the shareholding. So if we said there's 4 shareholding councils, that's not to say that each council will have equal shares. There's a lot of that stuff that kind of needs to be worked through once a decision has been made. Likewise with service levels and performance measurement, all of those things need to be worked through later on. Staffing and where the headquarters might be, the work program and prioritisation, and then transition of charging and the future pricing. David will talk to this, but there is some uncertainty around that. In terms of Masterton, so the cost of investment needed could be greater than what we currently know, and that would be the same case for a number of councils. So when we pull together our annual plans and our 10-year and 30-year strategies, it's all based on what we currently know, the best information that we have. And it is very common for councils to have low confidence level in the data that they hold. I think Masterton is fairly reasonable, but you don't know what you don't know, so there are still uncertainties around that. How the dollars stack up. I'm going to hand you over to David. Come on up, David.
Thanks, Mace. We've done some financial modelling, and financial modelling is all about making some assumptions to arrive at a conclusion that can be compared. So to make comparisons between one option and another, we try and make sure they are comparable. We're comparing apples with apples. We've used the same data in both, and we've identified the variables across the options. So for the Wairarapa Taurua, we've got 4 councils. They've got operating and capital costs for all the water activities that they produce. We put all those together, and the model is based on a utilities operation, so similar to Chorus or to Transpower. They're delivering a utility in a market to customers, and that's all they do. So not like a council that's got 25 different branches of activity. They deliver water, and that's what their focus will be. And therefore their debt funding and their capital funding align. All of their capital expenditure will be funded by debt. And the FFO, revenue is set to achieve FFO of 10%. FFO is funds from operations. So it's like running a surplus, so they must achieve a 10% surplus on their activities to be able to carry the level of debt that is forecast. And that's looked at by the lenders, the local government funding agency in particular, and the government want to make sure that the entity is prudently managed and doesn't have too much debt. And so setting that parameter in the model is one of the key drivers. For the Masterton only one, the 3 water components that are in our current long-term plan have been used, and our financial strategy as the basis. And in that financial strategy, the debt we incurred for building Homebush nearly 15 years ago is being repaid until 2034. So there's a reasonably big portion of debt repayment built into the costs of operating the water activities within the council at the moment, and we've continued to model that expectation that we will repay that debt before the consent runs out. And then we've built in additional capital expenditure for upgrading the Homebush plant from 2034 onwards, and that will be a significant expenditure, but at the moment, until we know a resource consent requirements, we don't know what we're spending the money on, but there is an expectation that the plant will have to meet higher environmental standards. So in terms of debt, use of debt, there are differences between the two financial models. We can, in Wairarapa Taurua, we can borrow up to 500% of operating revenue. That in the modelling, that's allowed us to go to 365 million is where it's forecast to be the maximum amount of debt that CCO will have, and that is 393% of operating revenue. So that it doesn't get to 500%, it doesn't need to get to 500% based on the capital forecasts and the borrowing needs to meet that capital program. Under the Masterton option, we have 175% as our cap of lending, and by 2038 the highest level of debt that we need is 165 million, which is 146% of our operating revenue. Again, we stay under the cap. So within both options can prudently borrow up to the borrowing limits that have been set. So the cost per connection, we boiled down the whole thing, all of the costs of operating the CCO or the Masterton operation divided by the number of connections. So it's not what someone will pay, it's simply a mathematical function of costs divided by connections. And then therefore we can compare the two. We start at a very similar level of 2,200 per connection for both options, and move through to 10 years. And the Masterton option is $200 a year more expensive, and by 20 years the Masterton option is $800 more expensive. So that's about efficiencies really that the CCO model achieves by focusing totally on the water option and getting efficiencies from how they spend the money and the debt and the borrowing, the use of debt. That's those numbers in a graphical form. So the capital investment and the debt and the revenue are all combined into the financial model to boil down to those numbers. And the efficiencies are the reason why the Wairapa-Tararua model even drops away, reduces over 20 years. There's no inflation built into those numbers, just in case you were hoping that we were forecasting a negative inflation rate. Inflation's stripped out of that, so clearly if there is inflation the numbers will increase, but we've tried to do it so it highlights the efficiencies that we think can be achieved with the CCO model. Under the Masterton model, the costs go up after 10 years because we have to borrow for Homebush again, and the debt on Homebush is only going to be a Masterton debt, whereas under the Wairapa-Tararua model that debt cost is able to be spread across all connections. Pricing over time is probably the elephant in the room, and we're addressing the elephant in the room, if you like. It is very much, how does the price change, who pays, and is there a ring fencing of the costs in each district under the CCO model. Standardised price means the same price that every connection, every consumer in the CCO area pays the same price. Now, that won't happen from day one. It might not happen for 10 years. It might not ever happen, but it might, and it does come down to what the shareholders' agreement is negotiated between the councils, and it also comes down to the prioritisation of the work program that the entity takes on. The South Wairapa capital program is quite big in the first 5 years of the long-term plan that they have proposed, and so the expenditure on their assets needs to be prioritised, but ring fencing their connections paying for that capital work means Masterton won't share or have to pay more to subsidise them. And that's what a non-standardised price would achieve. Standardising the price means there is a cross-subsidisation. There's no requirement for water charges to be standardised, but we do have a Commerce Commission looking over our shoulder and making sure we have equitable pricing, or the CCO will have that. So from a modelling point of view, we can model a standardised price and model a non-standardised price just for Masterton, but we also have an economic regulator who may come in and change the rules on us. The line graph is that one. The green bar, the green line, sorry, is the Masterton, sorry, it's the Wairapa Taurua CCO average price.
Can you point to that line? It's hard to see.
I don't think.
Also, these graphs are in your,
How did I do that?
in the book, those of you
Page
who...
28.
I'll go back.
This one here at the bottom.
Oh, look at that.
Oh.
I didn't know I could do that. So that line there, the pinky line, is the Masterton only option. So it is more than the CCO, and the CCO green line is just for Masterton. So it's no change to the costs here, no standardisation. If we standardised all 4 councils, that's the top line. So adding all councils together, there is a higher cost for Masterton ratepayers. And just to clarify, all of those numbers are for the connections that are connected to the water and wastewater and urban stormwater. There's no allocation of those costs to rural. There's some connected properties to the urban water supply in the rural area. They're currently already paying and will continue to pay towards the cost. There are Riversdale and Castle Point wastewater treatment plants. There's Tanui water and wastewater treatment. The costs of those at the moment are ring-fenced and paid for by the consumers in those areas, and I don't believe that would change. There's small considerations compared to the 10,000 consumers in the Masterton area, and that's what our focus is on in the consultation material. So we'll take some questions, but just the last slide is about the timeline that we're on. We're consulting now. We're going into submissions and hearing submissions from to take the feedback from this consultation. There will be a council decision made on the 21st of May as to what the preferred option is. If that is whichever option it is, we have to submit a water services delivery plan to the government by the 3rd of September. That's the legislation the government has passed, forcing councils to meet a set date, making decisions and getting on with it. If the decision is the Wairapa Taurua CCO, we have a lot of work to do between the 21st of May and the 3rd of September with the other 3 councils to work up a water services delivery plan that looks coherent and achievable. An establishment of a joint CCO or an enhanced Masterton model from 1st of July 2026. Again, a very short time frame.
Thanks, David. Stay up here. We'd be happy to take any questions.
This is a question about
Labour, I've got a whole lot of questions on the labour force. Can you confirm that it's 40% of water services and funding associated with that will be transferred out of Masterton District Council? Is that right? Is that an accurate figure or an estimate? 40%?
No, I think the two options are, one is that we join a council-controlled organisation where all assets and all debt in relation to the three water assets would be transferred out, and the other is none.
Yeah, well, I'm talking about the second situation where it's 40%. Is that an accurate assumption? It's a figure that I've come across.
At the moment, in urban, across Masterton urban area, approximately 40% of the rates we collect are collected to fund the water, wastewater and stormwater activities. So that revenue would be collected by the CCO, therefore the council wouldn't be collecting those rates.
So in terms of labour workforce, what are the implications there for people who are currently working in water services? How many will be transferred to the new
So a lot of that, there is some guidance in legislation, but a lot of that would form part of a council agreement potentially with the four councils. So there'll be some principles that would have to be put in place around what roles might transfer across, but you would expect that the majority of roles could move across to a new entity.
You don't have any idea of the number of staff that would be involved or where they'd be located?
I think the size of an entity for these four councils, there may be a head count of about 50 people.
Right, and there's admin staff, or I presume they'll have those within that?
Yes, they would have to have their own corporate services.
So the other question is around the workforce generally for this program, because it's being set up, because it's an urgent need apparently for attending to deferred infrastructure needs and so on. There will be a lot of demand for an increased labour force, workforce. So I'm just wondering what the government has in mind to cover that, because if they don't have that increased workforce, you're just going to be doing the same thing, perhaps for a higher cost, because if you have the council-controlled organisation, it's the cost of keeping that organisation going with its reports and its payment processes and so on. And having a completely different structure like that, there must be an advantage. Otherwise, why would we do it? And if there is no labour to perform the extra tasks that government wants to be attended to, what happens then?
Well, I can't speak for what central government wish to do in that space, but it has been known for a very long time that the sector is short in terms of skilled expertise. So that's not new, and that won't be a result of this kind of change, if there is a change to a separate entity. What was the second part of your question, sorry?
Well, I'm just thinking that if you can't actually increase the work that's being done on the infrastructure, which is the whole purpose of the legislation, so that more work can be done, so that the future is better catered for future needs. If that can't be done, we're just replicating the... Yeah,
okay, I understand what you're saying. I think it's about economies of scale and how the market can respond also. So just a straight transfer of one team to a new entity, you won't get any other change. But if you are transferring numerous teams to that entity, then you have the opportunity to look at rationalising work. So and the market has a chance to respond. So you may package bigger projects together. You may get more competitive pricing. You've got more buying power.
So you're suggesting that if all the councils pool their resources in terms of workforce, then they'll be able to do a more efficient job. Is that what you're saying?
Well, that is one of the advantages that that we've put in the pack and that we spoke to today.
Okay, so the other questions are, maybe we should let somebody else have a comment.
Oh, okay, Heather.
My question's, David, you mentioned 393 million of debt and for the CCO and 165 for Masterton. You said in the pack that Masterton's debt is repaid for water because out of depreciations fund, out of revenue, being paid off. What's the debt repayment policy for the CCO?
The assumption is loans are repaid over 30 years, but there's it's not about the repayment, it's about maximising the ability to borrow to fund capital projects.
Yeah, now my question's about, so in the modelling, you've got a debt repayment pathway for Masterton, and you've got obviously a debt repayment pathway for the CCO. Are they the same? Do they use the same numbers?
No.
Well, so why do they not use the same numbers? Because you're not, by giving us an annual cost, you're not asking us to compare apples with apples.
The model for the CCO groups all the council's capital requirements together and assumes that they can borrow to fund that capital requirement.
Still an interest charge on it though, isn't there?
There's an interest charge on it.
And a debt repayment which needs to be, but the debt repayments should be included in the connection charge.
Yes, yeah. The cost of debt servicing is interest and loan repayment.
So just to be clear, sorry, so in Masterton, we're paying off our debt based on the $3,000 odd a connection you've got in the thing.
Yeah.
In the CCO, we're not paying that debt off at the same rate.
It won't be at the same rate, no.
Yeah. So actually the figures are not comparable.
It's using that debt balance and staying within the guidelines and the rules to carry as much debt as possible to keep the revenue or the amount that customers are paying, keeping that as low as possible. So it's not using debt to fund operating costs because that's a recipe for disaster, but it's using debt to make sure the capital program is delivered without increasing revenue on a escalating scale.
Yeah, we all know it's easy to get debt, hard was paying it off, isn't it?
Question probably for David. The bar graph on Masterton only is based on non-standardisation. But I was interested, I don't think I've heard that before, but you mentioned before that if we start on as non-standardised, is it the Commerce Commission that can come in any time and say, no, that's over now, we're going to force you or ask you to become standardised? That might be a concern for ratepayers. They haven't got the set of rules that they are going to apply to us, but there's a scenario that has South Wairarapa paying $5,000 a connection and Masterton paying $2,000, and the Commerce Commission looking at that and saying $5,000 is too much. We want the whole country to be within $2,500 and $3,500 per connection as a guideline. So the CCO then has to start ramping Masterton up and South Wairarapa down. That's a potential scenario where they come in and try and standardise pricing for all consumers. So it's not a fixed thing, necessarily.
No, it's a decision of the CCO in terms of their pricing and how they, and they're governed by the shareholders, which are the councils.
So the shareholding councils may agree that they want each council to hold their prices for a certain number of years.
So that wasn't listed as a risk, was it, when you did the comparison of the two ways of doing it? because that's quite an enormous risk, really. You showed the graph that had the lines, but if we go to standardise, the price just balloons out.
Yeah,
and
so
yet you haven't put
Sure,
that
yeah.
as a risk. You've said that bigger scale means economy of scale, and you've said that it's going to be better, and that's a theoretical assumption.
That's right.
Bigger scale is
That's right.
economy. And then we find out, the Commerce Commission or whoever comes in and blows the top on the Masterton things. I think, to be fair, you need to point that out right at the beginning, that is a risk of going CCO.
Well, there can be changes to any legislation. There's also a risk that Taumata Arawai may drive a whole lot of additional compliance, which may blow the numbers out. So it's, where do you draw the line? We don't know
I think
exactly what's
that's
going to happen.
That's an obvious risk, though, isn't it? I mean, you've built it into your own graphs, so it's quite clearly an obvious risk, because there is no guarantee, although standardised, non-standardised charging is allowed, there's no guarantee it will be maintained. We know that now.
Is it likely to be a majority decision about that at the stakeholder level, shareholder level?
I think different shareholders will want different things. It's quite likely they will, right, because we're all in slightly different shape. And that's when the negotiations need to start happening, and each shareholder will be thinking about what are some bottom lines and minimums that they're wanting for their community.
What happens if, it's to the advantage of probably all the other councils for Masterton to be involved, and may not be an advantage for Masterton, because we will probably suffer most under standardisation. If we're going into this to get a cheaper option with economies of scale and cheaper lending and so on, isn't it undermined by standardisation? And what voice do we have, even at the beginning, at the negotiation stage?
So once a decision has been made after consultation, and let's just say for argument's sake it is Wairarapa Tararua, the four councils will need to develop an agreement on the work that needs to be done between the end of consultation and the delivery of a water services delivery plan. The water services delivery plan has to speak to some fundamentals, like how is this organisation going to be set up? What does implementation mean? Commercials, as many commercials that have been worked up around shareholding agreements, so for us to be able to get there, we have to work with the other councils to understand what everyone's bottom lines are, and this agreement would need to have an off-ramp in the event that one or more council did not get their bottom line.
What would Masterton's bottom line be?
That would be up to our elected members.
What do you mean by an off-ramp? That you can withdraw from the...
Where we may say, look, we haven't quite got what we think is most important for our community, so we are going to take an off-ramp and look at another alternative.
Surely this stuff's pretty critical. Why has it not been done before and put as a proposal to ratepayers?
Well, simply, one of the key things is the timing, right? We have to, legislation, no, it's not an excuse, it's actually legitimate and valid. There's a considerable amount of work that needs to take place before a water services delivery plan can be furnished. The legislation requires us to consult on a proposal and the current way that we are operating Three Waters. And until a decision's been made around that, a lot of things like who's going to be on the board, that happens later. That cannot be made decision.
I understand that. It's all very clear in the document. But this is a critical. Without this information, you can't vote for a combined proposal because there's too much uncertainty around standardisation, what the off-ramps are, whose bottom lines are what, how much has to be spent. And so to be honest, you're wasting your time by putting up stuff which doesn't have all the information there to ask us to make a decision. And I agree with you, it's a rushed process by central government, but it doesn't mean we make it,
Well, all we can do is encourage the community to make a submission.
Can I ask, is there an on-ramp? If we went for the Masterton model, is there an on-ramp so we could get on at a later stage, join up with the other councils? Just see how it goes.
So there's nothing in legislation which says that you cannot join another organisation at another time. There are no constraints around that.
What's the social licence going to be included in this? I know that, like with electricity organisations, you can't just turn power off. You know, what are we doing for our people who, you know, an extra $3,000 a year is a significant cost, particularly for tenants. Is there going to be something in place for our social responsibility?
I think there'll be policy positions that shareholders may expect from the entity, but going into the entity, you know, they'll be governed by Tamara Arawai, by the, you know, the Health Act. You can't just turn water off, that sort of thing.
Just a question, there's a number of things that seem to be assumptions with the prices that you put in there for example, Homebush. Now, I would expect Homebush should last 50 years, not 30 or 20. And you put in 60,000 additional. That's just an assumption, I presume.
60 million.
Yeah. Well, it's around the resource consent, actually.
Okay, and there's another one, you put in 79 million for extra water storage of treated water. Where on earth does that figure come from? That's huge tankage.
Not sure it's 79.
It looks like, was it 7.9 or 79 million?
I think it's probably 7.9.
7.9, but that's putting tanks up in a couple of Lansdowne or something? Or
If it's treated water, it's probably up a plane to store water after it's treated before it comes into town, to have greater resilience, either in an earthquake or in a drought, to be able to keep supplying the town. So more treated water storage is a resilience thing for our water supply, but more raw water storage, so it comes out of the river before it goes through the plant, is also needed, because the more droughts we have, the lower the river levels are, the more we get to a limit of our consent that we can take water out of the river.
Yep.
And if the river's too low, we can't supply the town. So having stored water from times when it's high flow in the river is also part of our resilience plan, and that's another capital item on the plan. But Homebush is all about the consent to discharge treated wastewater to the river.
yeah.
And at the moment, we built the new ponds at Homebush and irrigation land to dispose of water onto land, but it's only disposing of us 20% of the wastewater. David will know the number for that. So more land is needed if we want to take more out of the river.
But there's plenty of land that you could put it on. I'm sure the farmers would be more than happy.
Dairy farmers won't, because you can't graze dairy
No,
cows.
I'm aware of that. There's a lot of farms that are not dairying.
Yeah.
Did you have a question?
The houses are that way now.
Under the Y plus T, when it comes to the shareholding situation, and I know it's extremely difficult, I can see what you're struggling with all of the uncertainties and the unknowns, but you effectively have, if you look at the numbers, the other councils, the other three councils effectively have higher numbers than an actual fact of connections and personnel. So what's there to stop those three entities, if they wished, they could actually outvote the Masterton situation, and could they effectively advantage themselves at Masterton's cost? And just one other point there with regards to the standardisation, I prefer to call it subsidisation, but it's whatever word you choose. Effectively, what is the maximum length, do you think, if it went that way, standardisation, what's the maximum length that could be taken over? Can it be extended out to 30 years or whatever?
All really good questions. Don't have the answer to all of them. So in terms of the length of standardisation, we have sought some direction and some advice on that, and there's nothing concrete that says, what the maximum might be deemed to be acceptable. Your point around voting and other councils potentially positioning themselves, these are all things that as officers we are going to have to consider very carefully when we bring a set of recommendations to our elected members on what we might think would be useful bottom lines for Masterton. It also means that we have to, and the other councils will be doing the same, got to think about, our negotiations and, who we have in our negotiations and the skills and expertise, because that is going to be quite critical.
Thank you.
You talked about different values of shareholding. I'm assuming, because assets are going in and debt's following it, what we've got, that must play, is it going to play a part in the value or the percentage of the shareholding? I'm assuming rather than 25% each, because I'm assuming our assets are going to be worth more than South Warwick.
We would expect that it would certainly play a part.
Because you're going to have to get them off your balance sheet.
Yes.
You're going to have to do it opposite.
Yeah, that's right. And making sure there's the same valuation methodology. If the asset values are dictating the share percentages, then they have to be valued the same way. And establishing what the debt is. We know how much debt we've raised for our water activities versus our roading or our town hall. So the other councils may not have kept their finances in as tidy a condition and not know how much water debt they have. So getting into the books and making sure that's all established is part of the discovery phase and the next steps.
Just a question about economies of scale. In the report from Scott Consulting back in October 2014, pages 41 to 44 goes into great depth about why Wellington Water, which is very similar to what we're thinking of instigating here. So it's been going 10 years, and the results, if you like, the review is scathing it. And rather than economies of scale, the last 3 years, their maintenance costs have gone up 71%. So I guess a question, of course, you always go into these things with optimism, so with Wellington Water, and it's quite a similar thing. There's sort of 4 bodies plus the greater Wellington Greater Regional Council as well, which is very similar to here. So it seems to me there's a huge risk, and to be able to put the bar chart, to me, it's almost naughty to put economies of scale in there as a given.
Well, I think
There's nothing like a given.
it is actually a very different model to Wellington Water. So the Wellington Water model have no ownership over assets, and there's no debt transfer or revenue opportunities. So it is quite a different machine. And, there's lots of things going on in Wellington Water, including a lot of really talented people. So I'm not going to say any more about that, but I think it is a different kind of organisation. What we would be looking for, if that was the decision from our elected members, what the Masterton ELT would be looking for would be to make sure that we have the right monitoring in place to be ensuring that what any organisation said they were going to be doing with our shares and their assets, that we will be keeping a really close eye on them. So our role would very much change to monitoring, really.
I'm assuming that economies of scale is also relating to the operational ability of a new entity to be able to get work done. So, I mean, we talk about 50 people maybe in the new CCO, but of course most of your work is done by contractors. So I would see going with only the Masterton model as actually putting us in a weaker position, being able to access those contractors to do work at a sensible price in a timely way. Does that make sense?
That is definitely one of the advantages of being part of a bigger machine.
What do the other three councils want to do? Do you know? Have they given any indication of whether they want to?
They have, all three of them have only put out two options, one being the proposal, because legislation does not allow us to say what our preferred is, and our elected members were pretty clear that they did not want to say what the preferred option was. So all four of us have a proposal, being Wairarapa Tararua, and the alternative is the in-house model. The only difference would be with South Wairarapa, because in time Wellington Water is not going to exist, so their alternative model was not carry on as they currently are. It was be part of or set up an entity that would be an asset owning entity.
This is just an observation that Wellington Water, one of the main issues seemed to be the lack of competitive pricing, because they say to the same providers. I wonder if that could be an issue with the Y+T, and over time, if there is a lack of, everyone is scrambling for the limited labour that's available to perform water services tasks. So, I mean, we could go the way of Wellington and Wellington Water, perhaps, in that respect, if there's a lack of...
Are you asking me for a statement on that?
Just an observation.
Yeah.
Sorry, just looking at your graph, probably more for David. Looking at that graph on page 28, under the Y+T model with subsidisation, I know on year one we're paying $240 more than we are now. I counted up my rates water power portion yesterday, and I think I pay about $1,700 at the moment. But looking at that, $240 on year one, by year 20 I'm paying another 80% more on the subsidised model. I guess my question is, are Masterton residents paying double what they should be paying to subsidise these other councils? Is that the idea of...
Are you reading it as the top line, the black line as...
I mean, that's the worst case scenario for us all, isn't it? And we don't know what's coming, so we have to go by the worst case scenario right now.
It is worst case, and there's a large amount of capital expenditure that's been built into the South Wairarapa long-term plan, and those numbers provided to them by Wellington Water. There is that, and that is worst case. There is the expectation that they don't need to spend as much. So much ROI have said they will make sure that small wastewater treatment plants achieving this common standard rather than individual resource consent decisions that mean they're forced to put in bigger plants than they need to. So the potential for the black line to come down because of reduced capital expenditure, particularly by South Wairarapa, is there. So that's worst case, that black line could come down without us doing anything. But at the moment we're proposing we're not going to the black line. Masterton is going to have non-standardised pricing for as long as we're able to within the Commerce Commission and regulatory environment. But it's a model, and it's a set of numbers that produce those in order for us to compare the Wairarapa option and the Masterton standalone option.
So I think, just hearing that seems like we've got three sets of guardrails, don't we? Because if I'm hearing you right, you've got, like DIA guidance basically says you don't have to have standardised pricing, so we can sit anywhere in that range.
At the moment.
At the worst case, if there is a worst case scenario, you know Commerce Commission is going to come out with a range. So the top of that range looks significantly lower than what that looks like. So that means that in the worst case scenario, we might not get anything above 3,500. That's another guardrail. What's the third one? There's a third guardrail. It just looks to me like, so standardisation, the DIA guideline, and then the Commerce Commission range. That means that probably, and outside of amalgamation, unless full amalgamation happens, then who knows what that would mean. But that would actually mean that we'd probably be capped at maybe 3,500 or 4,000 in the worst case scenario, as opposed to what's the top of the scale.
No.
Is that right? Maybe. It just feels like it feels like there's layers of protection there, as opposed to us necessarily, unless the shareholder agreement allowed you to do something outside of that. Sure. If the shareholder agreement protected Masterton ratepayers by actually holding it at a certain level, then we should never be in that position of that top line.
And remember, their average numbers as well. And currently the charging mechanisms are different between all the councils. Masterton has a capital value rate for its wastewater and water, as well as a fixed charge, so 30% is fixed and 70% is capital value. We're moving to charging by the metre, so water usage for water, but there's no change to the capital value rating for wastewater. So no one's paying that average number. As you say, your number of 1,700 or something, there's a number of commercial properties paying significantly more than that, just because of the way the rating system works. So those are midpoint averages that we're trying to indicate how they move over time.
Without inflation adjusted.
Without inflation.
Now, these connection fees, we're talking about, aren't we?
It's an annual charge. These are annual charges for
So does
the pay
metering
for
come
the
on
service.
top of that?
So what would,
Metering come on top of that?
no, if there's metering, it would be part of that cost. So if say a scenario is that half of your cost is paid for by a flat charge, so you pay $1,000, and if you use this much water, you pay another $1,000. If you use this much more water, you pay $1,500. So there's a portion of the charge will be based on how much you use, and a portion based on a flat charge that everyone pays.
So that'll be Masterton Line and all the wide.
Again, that whole charging regime and how the charges are worked out is part of the CCO model that still hasn't been decided, and because every council is currently charging differently, bringing it all together and transitioning from where we are now to a future regime won't happen on day one. It'll be a number of years.
Now, going back to the combined one, setting up a separate committee or whatever it is to run it. So who picks those?
So a council-controlled organisation is run by a board.
No, who picks them?
Who picks the board members to get it started?
So all of those things would be like points of negotiation that each group of elected members would be wanting to weigh in on. Because that is quite a large group, we would be suggesting that there be perhaps a shareholders representative group.
Who's they?
They, as in the four councils, if you were looking at Wairarapa Tararua.
So the four councils get a say who they pick.
Yes.
Yeah, so we would.
Now, who monitors them once they've been picked?
They are required
Council
to.
have a representative on those boards or not?
No.
So how are they monitoring? They're doing the
So there is compliance reporting built into legislation in terms of how that organisation's performing. They are required to report back into central government and also, through to their shareholders.
So if you go back to Wellington Water, you've got the 3 hub councils in Wellington that each don't know what the hell the Wellington Water are up to. I mean, Robbie said that had that report come up and been scathing, but it doesn't seem like the actual councils, each representing councils, have been keeping an eye on how they spend the money.
Well, I can't comment on that, but, our advice would...
But in our scenario, if we go with a combined one, how do we know? We just get an annual report every year or something.
No, there are more intense requirements in terms of reporting, and our recommendation with the other council's officers would be that a shareholders representative group be set up that the CCOs would have to report back into, and some key decisions may be made by that group on behalf of the 4, but ultimately control and performance is down to the board of that company.
That are answerable to the councils.
To the shareholders, yep.
I've got a question about the timeline. So this consultation shuts in middle of April, end of April.
22nd.
2 days of hearings. And did I read that the council then has to make a decision within 5 days after the hearings? 6 days, we're pretty close to it.
Oh, sorry, Harriet.
It seems like, there's obviously a lot more questions. People have asked, a small set of people have asked more questions and want more information to be able to make a decision and provide a submission. But it seems a very quick turnaround from the hearings, 14th, 15th of May and 21st of May. I think that time frame should be changed, because I don't think that gives people enough time to listen to what other people have had to say, provide more feedback around it, talk to elected members about concerns which they may have. And I also think, if possible, that it would be really useful to have a bit more worked up examples rather than just the average connection, David, for the Masterton only one, like you do with the rates, just to sort of help people understand what the difference might be to them. And just one last question. The standardised subsidised cost at the top, that's assuming all the money everyone has to spend and all the 4 councils to achieve the results which we want. Yeah. So if that was capped by the Commerce Commission, then the debt level would have to go up, wouldn't it? If they said it was going to be 3,500 rather than 5,500, whatever number it is, you'd have to have a greater level of debt then, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Or reduce your work program.
Or to cap it. So the capping is immaterial in terms of helping people out.
If they deem that this is what's affordable, the maximum amount that's affordable, then the entity can only do the amount of work that they can do with the revenue that they've got.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
In terms of reassurance, the water strategy, I assume, will have KPIs and things built into it to be reporting against?
Yes, that's right. And there's also a statement of expectation. So the shareholders will set out what their expectations are from a CCO.
Will the government be monitoring that or signing it off?
No, that's signed off. That'll be signed off between the board and the shareholders.
Okay, so there's no overarching monitoring role to ensure that individual areas are running their business appropriately? There is?
I think it's a regulator.
Oh, there is a regulator.
There's 3 really. There's the Water Services Authority,
That original slide.
Commerce Commission and Regional Council.
And your water delivery plan, that's the shareholding entities coming up with that plan, is it?
No, each council has to deliver that plan now by the 3rd of September.
for consideration by the other shareholders?
No, so we submit those plans to DIA and that they approve those, which, hence the sort of, timeline.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
So sorry, for the joint one, you don't submit a joint plan?
We do, yep,
Okay.
yep,
So
we're required
it's
to
either
submit a joint.
plan or an individual plan?
That's right.
By the first notice provider, so.
3rd of September. Did you?
I've got two questions. If the majority of submissions are for the status quo, I'm not sure if it's a referendum or not, but does that change the preferred option for council?
Well, at this point, council doesn't have a preferred option.
Well,
We've got a proposal and,
what you like,
yeah.
but it's a proposal,
Karen, do you know the
which
answer
is
to
normally your
that?
preferred option.
If there was-
It's the same as any other consultation, in that it's not a vote, it's not a referendum. So council needs to take into consideration the views of the community as it knows them. So the submissions are one way of doing that. So council will consider the submissions. Just coming back to that timeline, just to be clear that the submissions will be made available to the councillors and then put up on the website as soon as we're able to turn that process around. So that will be after the closure date in April, and then there's a time period there before the hearings. Now the hearings are just for the people who want to come and talk to their submissions at the council. So there's no extra information from the hearing that the councils will have to take on board. So the councillors have got all of that time from submissions closing when they get the submissions to read and to consider all of the submissions before they then go into the deliberations where they talk about what they've heard and what people have, what people have said. So coming back to the poll, it's not a poll. Council will take into account the views of the community. There's nothing to say that therefore the council has to do exactly what the community say. However, the council would need to give reasons as to why, if they were the responses, that council is not going to be following the community's views. But there's no legal requirement for the council to do that. But it would need to explain why it thought differently through that process.
Is it standard practice for council to give reasons for decision that's made against the majority of submitters?
Absolutely, it would be. Absolutely, it would be a reason
I
to
haven't
say.
discovered any for the town hall, the consultation on the town hall in the long-term plan. So maybe you could direct me to.
Well, actually, the consultations on the town hall, we're going to go off, but they weren't. They weren't.
About giving reasons. I mean, if you do
The
take
reason-
a decision that's contrary to the majority of submitters, how do you explain it? And in this case,
I won't get into that. I don't agree with what your statement is, but we're not going to be distracted by the town hall.
But generally speaking,
So it would need to be really clear. It's common practice through that consultation process, and it's not just common practice. It's good practice to say why, even if it was the same reasons that the community had said, why you're making a decision. So, the common law says that people need to understand why you've made that decision. So the council would be under even more of a duty to say we're not going to follow that, and here are the reasons why.
yeah, I must say, it's after having put a huge amount of effort into submissions in the past, or current maybe, it doesn't seem to happen. So it's not very motivating. We have these discussions and have these concerns that arise out of it, and council has its preferred decision, and that's the way it stays. So, sorry, that's the way I see it.
Do we have any other questions about local water done well?
Now, just one question. I presume you've had a vote. In this, you've got that our proposal. I presume that means council proposal. So you are proposing that this goes ahead with other council. What was the vote count, please, on for and against for putting this on?
6 for and 2 against.
Sorry?
6 for and 2 against.
Thank you.
And just to be clear, I think that Baz did say we're required under the legislation to identify a proposal and then put in the consultation document all the reasons for the proposal and the advantages and disadvantages, and then we were also required to put that information in for that specific option of carrying on with the way that we currently do things. There was the ability to have other options in there, but you'll be aware that council had discounted other options earlier on in the piece before Christmas time.
I think this tends to lean in favour of the cause, that's all, and I think it should be, if you've got the votes as they are, then perhaps the whole town should have a vote on it. Just to
Before
Mandatory.
We encourage your submission.
Not just submissions, because you'll only get 2% of people submitting. There's not enough people know about it.
So when council makes its deliberations, it takes into account the views of the community, and it also takes into account all of the information in front of it, so everything that the teams have done so far on the modelling and the advantages and the disadvantages, and will weigh all of that up in order to make a decision. Unfortunately, there's nothing in the legislation, or fortunately in the legislation, that says it goes to a referendum.
Lynn has a question.
Lynn, get part two of your question.
Oh, sorry.
My second question. Sorry, a bit of a statement to start with. But Masterton's urban population has the lowest average income per person of these 4 councils. South Wairarapa, for example, has a 33% higher income per capita. Why should Masterton's poorer economy subsidise other councils whose connection costs are significantly higher than ours, especially over time? So my question is actually to the councillors in the room, because I can see they're all here tonight. Except one.
Except Tom.
Oh, Tom should be online. Will councillors please think about this and choose the cheapest option for Masterton ratepayers going forward, not the other councils and having to subsidise the wealthier people who live in Greytown? And Masterton.
Where's your question? Oh, you asked
Will
the
councillors...
Well done.
Please make a submission. That's all
I
I
will
can say, because
after my town hall one.
And a serious point that councillors will need to consider what you put in submission. So if you don't make a submission,
This is about Masterton
won't be
ratepayers.
taking it into consideration. So please, and encourage all of them, people that you know, to do the same.
No other questions? There's no other did you have a...
I've got one. I could ask a cheeky question. Given that you're getting rid of 40% of your services, does that mean we don't need an extension on Waiata House?
I think we'll close it there. Thank you everybody for coming. Hope that was useful, and really encourage your submissions.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Thank you.